The persistent, almost mournful creak of the old oak sign hanging above Main Street was the unofficial heartbeat of Willow Creek. It swayed with every passing breeze, a rusty lament that seemed to echo the slow, steady decay of the town itself. Willow Creek, Massachusetts, was a place steeped in a history it was rapidly forgetting. Its colonial-era homes, once proud testaments to early American craftsmanship, now leaned precariously, their paint peeling like sun-scorched skin. The cobblestone streets, charming in old photographs, were uneven and cracked, tripping hazards for unsuspecting tourists who rarely ventured beyond the single, struggling antique shop. The once bustling textile mill, the town's former economic engine, stood a hulking, skeletal ruin on the banks of the sluggish Willow Creek, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring out at a forgotten past. The air, even on a bright summer afternoon, carried a faint, lingering scent of damp wood, forgotten dreams, and the subtle, inescapable dust of decline. This was a town that lived on nostalgia and a stubborn refusal to change, slowly suffocating under the weight of its own inertia. In the midst of this stagnation lived Ezra Thorne, a boy who saw not decay, but possibility. At 12 years old, Ezra was a quiet, unassuming presence, often overlooked by the boisterous children who played street hockey in the cracked parking lot of the old general store. His hair, perpetually falling into his earnest blue eyes, was usually streaked with charcoal or pencil lead, while other boys were chasing baseballs or climbing trees. Ezra could be found perched on a splintered park bench or tucked away in the forgotten corner of the town square, his thin fingers meticulously moving across the pages of a worn sketchbook. He wasn't drawing superheroes or fantastical creatures. He was drawing buildings, old buildings, new buildings, buildings that didn't exist yet but shimmered in his imagination with sleek lines and soaring arches. He'd redraw the dilapidated old library, transforming its crumbling facade into a vibrant community hub, or reimagine the abandoned mill as a gleaming, multi-story cultural center, complete with art studios and a riverside promenade. His world was one of blueprints and facades, of structural integrity and aesthetic flow, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of Willow Creek. There goes Ezra, off in his own little world again. Mrs. Gable, the owner of the antique shop, would often sigh, shaking her head as he drifted past. Always dreaming. The label stuck. Dreamer. It wasn't meant maliciously, not usually. It was just a shorthand for odd, for different, for a boy whose head was always demonstrably in the clouds. Ezra's father, Thomas Thorne, a practical man who worked long hours at the town's dwindling lumberyard, viewed his son's architectural pursuits with a mixture of bemused resignation and quiet concern. "Son, those fanciful drawings won't put food on the table," he'd often say, his voice gruff but kind. He loved Ezra fiercely, but he was a man of the earth, of tangible labor. He understood wood and nails, not soaring glass and steel. He wanted Ezra to be grounded, to learn a trade, to inherit the lumber business, to secure a predictable future in a town that offered few surprises. He worried that Ezra's dreams were too big, too fragile, for the hard realities of Willow Creek. The unspoken implication was always there. Dreams were fine, but they were not practical. They were not real. The most cutting whispers, however, came from his peers. Roy Miller was the chief architect of these verbal jabs, a boy whose robust frame and booming voice made him a natural leader among the town's children. Roy's father, Kenneth Miller, was a shrewd local businessman, the owner of Miller's Hardware, a thriving enterprise that seemed immune to Willow Creek's decline. Roy inherited his father's calculating eyes and his disdain for anything that didn't immediately translate into profit or power. He viewed Ezra's quiet contemplation and artistic pursuits as weakness, an invitation for ridicule. "Look at the dreamer, drawing his castles in the air," Roy would sneer, his voice loud enough for everyone on the playground to hear. "Still playing with dollhouses. Thorne, When are you going to grow up and do something useful? His words, sharpened with the casual cruelty of childhood, often drew snickers from the other kids, who quickly learned that associating with Ezra meant risking Roy's scorn. Ezra would simply clench his jaw, his eyes fixed on his sketchbook, pretending not to hear, but each barb landed, a small, persistent ache in his chest. Roy's jabs weren't just about childhood bullying. They were a direct attack on Ezra's very essence, on the passion that defined him. Roy saw Ezra's creativity not as talent, but as a flight from reality, a sign of impracticality, and thus, a weakness to be exploited or crushed. One sweltering July afternoon, the kind of oppressive heat that made the very air shimmer above the cracked asphalt, Ezra found himself sketching the crumbling facade of the old town hall. Its once grand porch, supported by fluted wooden columns, now sagged dangerously, a casualty of years of neglect and a particularly harsh winter. He imagined reinforcing the foundation, replacing the rot with strong, new timber, perhaps even adding a small, modern annex to house a new community center. He was so engrossed that he didn't notice Mrs. Eleanor Finch until she stood directly over him, her shadow falling across his sketchbook. Mrs. Eleanor was a fixture in Willow Creek, a gentle woman in her late 70s, whose small, meticulously kept cottage stood in stark contrast to the general disrepair of the neighborhood. She was known for her kindness, her homemade apple pies, and her quiet observations of the world around her. Her eyes, though faded with age, held a sharp, knowing glint. "That's a fine drawing, Ezra," she said, her voice soft, free of judgment. Ezra startled, quickly trying to hide his sketchbook. He was used to dismissive glances, not genuine interest. "It's just an idea, Mrs. Eleanor," he mumbled, his cheeks flushing. She smiled, a warmth that reached her eyes. "An idea that could truly bring this old place back to life. You have a gift, child. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." She paused, her gaze drifting to her own house, specifically to the porch where a section of the railing had completely rotted through, leaving a gaping, dangerous hole. She had tried to patch it herself, but her old hands weren't strong enough, and she couldn't afford to hire a carpenter. The exposed wood looked raw and painful, a small but significant detail in her otherwise perfect little world. Ezra followed her gaze. He saw the problem instantly, not just the rotten wood, but the structural weakness, the potential for further damage. He imagined the precise angle of the cut, the type of wood needed, the proper joinery. He saw a simple, elegant solution. His mind, usually lost in grand designs, quickly translated the complex principles of architecture into a practical, tangible fix, without a word. He closed his sketchbook, placed it carefully on the bench, and walked over to Mrs. Eleanor's porch. He ran his fingers along the splintered wood, assessing the damage. "I could fix that for you, Mrs. Eleanor," Ezra said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know how. My dad has some good timber in the yard, and I have tools." It wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic rescue from a burning building or a runaway horse. It was simply a boy offering his skills, his time, his genuine desire to help, without expectation of reward or recognition. He knew how much Mrs. Eleanor cherished her home, and he recognized her quiet struggle. This small, unheralded act, born of empathy and an innate understanding of construction, was his own unique way of saving the cat. It demonstrated his practical capabilities, a hidden facet of his dreamer persona. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, then softened. A genuine smile, full of gratitude, spread across her face. "Why, Ezra Thorne, that would be the kindest thing. Are you sure? Dear, it looks like a lot of work." "It's no trouble," Ezra insisted, already mentally measuring the timber. Over the next 2 afternoons, while Roy Miller and his friends were busy devising new pranks, Ezra diligently worked on Mrs. Eleanor's porch. He borrowed a saw and a hammer from his father, carefully selected a sturdy piece of treated lumber, and meticulously cut and fitted the new railing. His movements were precise, his brow furrowed in concentration. The work was slow, painstaking, and hot. But Ezra found a deep satisfaction in the tangible act of building, of repairing. He sanded the new wood until it was smooth, primed it, and even helped Mrs. Eleanor apply a fresh coat of white paint. When he was finished, the new section of railing was perfectly flush, stronger and more stable than the original, blending seamlessly with the rest of the porch. It was a small detail, but it transformed the entire facade of Mrs. Eleanor's home, restoring a piece of its dignity. Mrs. Eleanor baked him a fresh apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples filling the summer air, a silent testament to his quiet kindness and unexpected skill. The mayor of Willow Creek, Mr. Robert Thorpe, was a man who prided himself on his sensible approach to town governance. He had been mayor for 20 years, presiding over Willow Creek's gentle decline with a firm hand and an unwavering commitment to the status quo. To him, change was an unwelcome disruption, progress an expensive gamble. He viewed the town as a perfectly preserved museum piece, albeit one in need of a good dusting. His office, located in the very town hall Ezra had sketched, was filled with dusty ledgers and framed photographs of Willow Creek from its heyday, a constant reminder of how things should be. He saw Ezra Thorne as an oddity, a well-meaning but ultimately misguided child. "That Thorne boy," he'd once mused to a town council member. "Always sketching those outlandish structures. We need practical solutions, not fanciful dreams." His words, though not overtly malicious, carried the weight of established authority and inherent dismissal. He represented the entrenched resistance to any form of radical innovation, the very force that kept Willow Creek stagnant. One autumn afternoon, as leaves swirled across the town square, Ezra was sketching a new design for the abandoned mill. He envisioned converting it into a vibrant community center, with a soaring glass atrium that would capture the natural light, a public library, and workshops for local artisans. His sketchbook, typically tucked away, lay open on his lap, displaying a highly detailed, almost professional-looking rendering of the transformed mill. The details were intricate, the precise angles of the steel beams, the innovative use of recycled materials, the integration of green spaces. It was a vision far beyond the capabilities of a typical 12-year-old, hinting at a talent that was prodigious, almost preternatural. He had been working on it for months, each line a testament to his burgeoning genius. Roy Miller, however, had been lurking nearby, ostensibly playing basketball with some friends, but always keeping a peripheral eye on Ezra. Roy still harbored a deep-seated resentment for Ezra's quiet self-possession, his refusal to be openly intimidated. He saw Ezra's passion for design as a direct challenge to his own brutish simplicity, an intellect he couldn't comprehend and therefore sought to belittle. He craved control, and Ezra's independence was an affront. Now, seeing the open sketchbook, Roy seized his chance. He swaggered over, his friends trailing behind him, a smirk twisting his lips. "What's this? Thorne still drawing your little fantasy worlds." He snatched the sketchbook from Ezra's lap before the boy could react, holding it aloft, its pages flapping in the breeze. "Let's see what masterpiece the dreamer has cooked up now." Roy flipped through the pages, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the intricate details of the mill design, a flicker of something akin to surprise. Quickly masked by contempt, crossed his face. He saw the sheer complexity, the ambitious scale. It was far more than crude childhood doodles, but he quickly regained his composure, his sneer returning. "What is this nonsense?" he scoffed, waving the book dismissively. "You think you're going to build some glass monstrosity in our town? This isn't Boston. Thorne, this is Willow Creek. We don't need your crazy, useless ideas." He tore a page from the sketchbook, the detailed blueprint of the mill's central atrium, and crumpled it into a tight ball, tossing it contemptuously into a nearby overflowing trash can. Stick to drawing stick figures, dreamer. You'll never be anything more than a glorified doodler. His friends snickered, their laughter echoing through the quiet square. Roy's actions were not just bullying. They were a calculated act of destruction, designed to crush Ezra's spirit and publicly invalidate his talent. He understood, instinctively, that this was something precious to Ezra, and he aimed to destroy it. Ezra watched the crumpled paper disappear into the trash, a cold wave of helplessness washing over him. His heart pounded with a mixture of anger and profound sorrow. The mill design, his secret labor of love, reduced to trash. He said nothing, simply picking up his damaged sketchbook, his eyes fixed on the empty page where his detailed blueprint had been. He felt the familiar weight of the whispers, the dismissive glances, the crushing certainty that Willow Creek would never understand him. He was a dreamer in a town that had forgotten how to dream, a builder in a place content to crumble. The incident, raw and painful, crystallized the growing chasm between Ezra's aspirations and the rigid reality of his hometown, solidifying the unspoken truth Willow Creek had no place for his dreams. Not yet. The silence of the Thorne household had always been a heavy cloak, woven from the practical concerns of a single father and the quiet intensity of a dreaming boy. But in the spring following the incident with Roy Miller, the silence grew heavier, tinged with the unspoken anxiety of financial strain. Thomas Thorne, Ezra's father, had watched the lumberyard, his family's livelihood for 3 generations, struggle against the relentless tide of economic downturns and dwindling local demand. The old mill had closed years ago, and with it, much of Willow Creek's industry faded into memory. Now, even the smaller construction projects that once kept the lumberyard afloat were drying up. One evening, after a particularly sparse dinner of canned soup and stale bread, Thomas called Ezra into the small, cluttered living room. The worn armchair sagged under his weight, and the lines of worry etched around his eyes seemed deeper than usual. Ezra, usually absorbed in his sketchbook, felt a prickle of unease. His father rarely initiated serious conversations. "Son," Thomas began, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, I've had to make some difficult decisions. The lumberyard isn't doing well. We're barely making ends meet. And, well, I got a call today from your Aunt Martha in Arizona. Ezra's stomach tightened. Aunt Martha lived 1,000 miles away, in the sun-baked desert of Phoenix, a place as alien to him as the moon. He rarely saw her. She's offered me a job. Thomas continued, his gaze fixed on a loose thread on his trousers. Good pay, steady work, in a construction company. They're building a lot out there, but it means we'd have to move. To Phoenix. The words hung in the air, a finality that snatched Ezra's breath away. Leave Willow Creek. Leave the crumbling buildings that whispered promises to him, the familiar streets, the hidden nooks where his imagination soared. A wave of profound sadness washed over him, chilling him despite the warmth of the small room. He looked at his father, at the tired slump of his shoulders, and understood the unspoken plea. This wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. His father was sacrificing his own comfort, his entire life, to provide for him. Yet, beneath the sorrow, a flicker of something else ignited. Phoenix, a city of new beginnings, of modern skyscrapers reaching for the sky, of endless possibilities for an aspiring architect. It was a place where dreamers might actually build. The idea was terrifying, exhilarating. He imagined vast construction sites, innovative designs, a canvas far grander than anything Willow Creek could offer. It was a desperate yearning for recognition, for a chance to escape the suffocating label of dreamer that had always held him back. He was torn, caught between the comforting pull of the familiar and the terrifying allure of the unknown. He looked at his father's weary face, and the decision, though heartbreaking, became clear. "Okay, Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Okay." The news of Ezra Thorne and his father leaving Willow Creek spread quickly through the small town, carried on the same idle whispers that had always defined Ezra. Some expressed genuine regret, particularly those who knew Thomas Thorne's quiet integrity. Most, however, offered a shrug and a casual nod. Good riddance for the boy. One elderly woman at the general store was overheard saying, "Too much of a dreamer for this town anyway. He'd never make anything of himself here." Her words, oblivious to the sting they carried, echoed the prevailing sentiment. Roy Miller, upon hearing the news, let out a triumphant bark of laughter. He was at the local diner, holding court with his usual cronies, their greasy hair slicked back, their jeans stained with the grime of adolescence. Finally, the dreamers flying away. He crowed, elbowing his friend, Kevin. "Willow Creek's not big enough for his grand visions. Maybe he can go draw sandcastles in the desert." His contempt was palpable, a final venomous jab designed to drive Ezra away with a sense of utter worthlessness. He saw Ezra's departure not as a family struggle, but as his own personal victory, a purging of an irritant, a confirmation of his belief that only the practical and the ruthless survived. He reveled in Ezra's perceived failure to fit in, to amount to anything in Willow Creek. Ezra heard the whispers, saw the indifferent shrugs, and felt the sharp sting of Roy's cruel taunts. Each one was a fresh wound, but they also acted as a perverse kind of fuel. He would not just leave, he would return. He would return and show them. The determination solidified in his young heart, a fierce, silent vow that would echo through the years. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about proving them wrong, about building a future that defied their meager expectations. The pain of leaving, the sting of being cast out, was transmuted into an unyielding resolve. There would be no turning back. His old life, defined by whispers and scorn, was unequivocally behind him. The day before their departure, Ezra decided to pay a final visit to Mrs. Eleanor Finch. Her little cottage, with its perfectly repaired porch railing, stood like a beacon of quiet resilience in the fading light of afternoon. Mrs. Eleanor met him at the door, her gentle eyes already red-rimmed. She knew about their move. "Oh, Ezra, dear boy," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she pulled him into a warm, apple-scented hug. "I'm so sorry to see you go." Ezra swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Me too, Mrs. Eleanor. I'll miss your pies." She chuckled softly, then led him inside, to her small, cozy sitting room, filled with antique furniture and the scent of lavender. On the coffee table, a small, carefully wrapped package lay waiting. "I have something for you," she said, her voice hushed. "A little going-away present. Something to help you on your journey." Ezra unwrapped it carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a slim, leather-bound book. It was old, its cover worn smooth with age, and its pages, slightly yellowed, were filled with intricate, hand-drawn sketches of magnificent cathedrals, sprawling libraries, and soaring bridges. The handwriting, elegant and precise, explained architectural principles, discussed the interplay of light and shadow, and mused on the spiritual power of space. It was a personal journal, a collection of thoughts and designs by a forgotten architect from the late 19th century, a man who, like Ezra, had once dared to dream beyond the confines of his small town. It was a treasure, a tangible link to a lineage of dreamers. "This belonged to my grandfather," Mrs. Eleanor explained, her voice a whisper. "He was an architect, though he never built anything grand. He spent his life dreaming, much like you. But he believed that true beauty lies not just in the structure, but in the vision behind it. He would have understood you. Ezra." She paused, her gaze fixed on his face, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing wisdom. And this, she continued, placing a gnarled hand over his, this isn't just a book, dear. It's a compass. It will guide you. Remember what I told you. You have a gift. And one day, Willow Creek will need that gift. It will need your dreams to rebuild, to truly live again. You mark my words. Ezra looked down at the book, then up at Mrs. Eleanor, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and dawning understanding. Her words, delivered with quiet conviction, felt less like a prediction and more like a sacred promise. Willow Creek would need him. The thought, once a desperate fantasy, now carried the weight of a prophetic truth. He clutched the book tightly, its worn leather warm against his palm. It was a connection to the past, a guide for the future, and a powerful antidote to the venomous words of Roy Miller. This was the point of no return, a decisive break with his past, propelling him towards an uncertain but undeniably destined future. The next morning, the air was crisp and cool, hinting at the approaching autumn. Ezra stood beside his father's beat-up Ford pickup truck, its bed crammed with their meager belongings. Willow Creek stretched out around him, familiar and yet suddenly distant. The old general store, the sagging town hall, the desolate mill. They all seemed to watch him, silent witnesses to his departure. He saw a few neighbors waving, a couple of kids playing in the distance, but no one from Roy Miller's group. They were likely still celebrating his exit. His father, grim-faced but resolute, climbed into the driver's seat. "Ready, son?" Ezra looked back at Mrs. Eleanor's cottage one last time, a faint warmth in his chest. He looked at the old sign creaking above Main Street, a sound that no longer felt mournful, but rather like a distant, fading memory. He took a deep breath, clutching the worn leather book tucked securely into his backpack. He was leaving the whispers, the dismissals, the quiet suffocation of a town that couldn't comprehend his vision. He was embarking on a journey to a new world, a new life, armed with an ancient wisdom and a burning conviction. He would not look back, not with regret, at least, only with the fierce, unyielding determination to return. One day, not as the dreamer they had scorned, but as the architect who would fulfill Mrs. Eleanor's quiet prophecy. The open road beckoned, a vast, promising canvas for the dreams he would finally bring to life. The journey from Willow Creek to Phoenix, Arizona, was more than just a geographical shift for Ezra Thorne. It was a passage into a new dimension of being. The landscape blurred past the truck window, the familiar green hills of Massachusetts slowly giving way to the stark, majestic browns and reds of the American Southwest. Each mile was a deliberate shedding of the whispers, the snickers, and the suffocating feeling of being misunderstood. Ezra clutched the worn leather journal from Mrs. Eleanor, its pages filled with the elegant sketches of a forgotten architect, a silent companion on his solitary pilgrimage. His father, Thomas, though still outwardly reserved, seemed to breathe a little easier with each mile they put between themselves and the fading lumberyard, a new, tentative hope flickering in his eyes. He didn't understand Ezra's architectural visions, but he understood the need for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild, however mundane the construction might be. Phoenix was a shock to Ezra's senses. The air was dry and hot, thick with the scent of desert dust and blooming oleander, a sharp contrast to the damp, earthy fragrance of Willow Creek. The city itself was a sprawling metropolis, a canvas of gleaming glass skyscrapers, sprawling suburban developments, and a constant hum of construction. Cranes clawed at the sky like metallic giants, and the rhythmic pounding of hammers became the new soundtrack to Ezra's life. It was a place where dreams were not only tolerated, but actively built, brick by towering brick. This was the antithesis of Willow Creek, a vibrant, sprawling testament to human ambition. Thomas Thorne quickly found work with a large construction firm, his practical skills in demand. He worked long hours, his hands calloused and strong, providing a steady income that allowed Ezra to enroll in a new school. Ezra, however, wasn't interested in typical high school activities. His afternoons, evenings, and weekends were dedicated to a singular obsession: architecture. He devoured books on Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, and Zaha Hadid. He spent hours at construction sites, mesmerized by the choreographed chaos of steel rising against the blue desert sky, the meticulous pouring of concrete, the intricate dance of machinery and human hands. He learned the language of blueprints, the physics of stress and strain, the art of blending form and function. His high school art teacher, Ms. Evelyn Reed, a sharp-eyed woman with a passion for cultivating raw talent, quickly recognized Ezra's extraordinary gift. She saw past his quiet demeanor to the blazing intensity of his vision. When he presented a complex, innovative design for a school library, complete with soaring, light-filled spaces and sustainable materials, she didn't dismiss it as fanciful. Instead, she enrolled him in advanced drafting courses, found him mentors in local architectural firms, and pushed him to apply for the most prestigious university architecture programs in the country. "Ezra," she once told him, her voice firm but kind, "your dreams are not just dreams. They are blueprints waiting to be built. Don't ever forget that." Her words, echoing Mrs. Eleanor's quiet prophecy, solidified his resolve. Ezra applied to and was accepted into the highly competitive architecture program at the University of Southern California, USC. The news, when it came, felt like a thunderclap. It was a golden ticket, a validation of years spent hunched over sketchbooks, enduring whispers and scorn. His father, though still not fully grasping the intricacies of Ezra's passion, swelled with paternal pride. "Go get 'em, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, shaking Ezra's hand firmly. "Make something of yourself." University was a crucible. Ezra thrived in the demanding environment, surrounded by brilliant minds and cutting-edge technology. He spent countless nights in the studio, fueled by cheap coffee and an unyielding drive. He learned to render complex digital models, to understand the intricacies of urban planning, to design structures that were not just aesthetically pleasing, but also environmentally sustainable and socially impactful. His unique approach, blending classic structural integrity with bold, organic forms inspired by nature, began to draw attention from his professors. He didn't just design buildings, he designed experiences, spaces that breathed and interacted with their surroundings. His first significant project came in his final year of graduate school, a proposal for a new civic center in a rapidly growing coastal city in California. The city council was looking for something iconic, something that would define their burgeoning identity. Ezra's design, a fluid, wave-like structure that seemed to emerge organically from the landscape, was daring, unconventional, and breathtaking. It incorporated natural ventilation, rainwater harvesting, and integrated public green spaces. He was a student, competing against established firms, but his vision was undeniable. He won the commission. The construction of the Civic Center, named the Pacific Crest, was a grueling but exhilarating experience. Ezra, still in his early 20s, spent months on site, overseeing every detail, from the pouring of the foundations to the installation of the intricate glass facade. He learned to navigate the complex world of construction logistics, managing teams of engineers, contractors, and laborers. The project was a resounding success, earning critical acclaim from architectural journals and delighting the city's residents. It became a landmark, a symbol of modern coastal architecture, and a testament to Ezra's nascent genius. "Thorne's work is a breath of fresh air," wrote a prominent critic in Architectural Digest. "He blends the boldness of the modernists with an organic sensibility rarely seen today, a true visionary." The accolades poured in. Suddenly, Ezra Thorne, the dreamer from Willow Creek, was a name to watch in the architectural world. Over the next decade, Ezra's star continued to rise. He established his own firm, Thorne and Associates, based in a sleek, minimalist office in Los Angeles. His portfolio grew, each project more ambitious than the last. He designed a groundbreaking eco-resort nestled in the Colorado Rockies, a contemporary art museum in downtown Chicago that seemed to defy gravity, and a series of innovative mixed-use developments that transformed urban blight into vibrant, livable communities. His projects garnered numerous awards, including the prestigious Pritzker Architecture Prize nomination, marking him as one of the most influential architects of his generation. His name became synonymous with sustainable, transformative design. He was no longer just a promising young architect. He was a world-famous architect, his visions etched in steel and glass across the globe. Despite his meteoric rise, Ezra never forgot Willow Creek. He kept Mrs. Eleanor's journal tucked away in a special drawer in his sleek office, a tangible link to his past and a quiet reminder of his promise. He called Mrs. Eleanor every month, listening to her gentle updates about the town, its slow, inexorable decline, the whispers of new developments, and the unchanging presence of characters like Mayor Thorpe and Roy Miller. Mrs. Eleanor would always end their conversations with the same soft refrain. "The town still needs you, Ezra." One day, her words, once a quiet prophecy, now seemed to carry a growing urgency. His father, Thomas, after years of steady work in Phoenix, decided to retire. He visited Ezra in Los Angeles, marveling at the towering buildings his son had designed, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and a gentle bewilderment. He still didn't fully grasp the abstract complexities of architecture, but he understood success, and he understood that his son had truly made something of himself. Ezra, however, felt a strange pull. He had built monuments, redefined skylines, and shaped communities across the country. But none of them were Willow Creek. He often found himself staring at the complex blueprints on his desk, his mind drifting back to the sagging porch of the town hall, the desolate skeleton of the old mill, the town that had dismissed him, the town he had vowed to save. The memories, once painful, had mellowed with time, replaced by a sense of unfinished business. He wondered if Mrs. Eleanor's prophecy was finally coming true. He had conquered the world of architecture, but the true test, he knew, lay not in a grand metropolis, but in the forgotten corners of his own past. The whispers of Willow Creek, once a burden, had now become a quiet, insistent call. The relentless sun of Willow Creek beat down on Mayor Robert Thorpe's thinning hair as he stood on the cracked asphalt of Main Street, wiping sweat from his brow with a frayed handkerchief. His normally neatly pressed shirts were perpetually rumpled these days, and the lines on his face, once merely signs of age, were now deeply etched furrows of worry. Willow Creek was in trouble, a different kind of trouble than its slow, almost graceful decay. This was a brutal, immediate crisis, a monstrous summer storm. Unlike anything the town had seen in a century, had ripped through Willow Creek just 2 weeks prior. It wasn't just a heavy rain. It was a furious, almost biblical deluge that turned the gentle Willow Creek River into a raging torrent. Flash floods had swept through the lower parts of town, damaging countless homes, buckling the foundations of the historic bridge connecting the old town to the newer residential areas, and, most devastatingly, compromising the structural integrity of the nearly century-old dam that protected the entire town from the reservoir upstream. The storm had left behind a landscape of ruined homes uninhabitable, businesses shuttered, and a pervasive sense of fear clinging to the damp air. Mayor Thorpe, a man who prided himself on his sensible and steady hand, found himself utterly out of his depth. He had always been adept at maintaining the status quo, at overseeing the slow, predictable decline. But this was a cataclysm. Federal aid was slow to arrive, tangled in bureaucratic red tape. Local contractors were overwhelmed, their bids astronomical. The town's meager emergency funds were quickly depleted. The town hall, the very symbol of his authority, was still partially flooded, its ancient records stained and illegible. He called emergency meetings, consulted with state engineers, even spoke to national urban planning consultants. Each conversation ended with the same grim prognosis: the cost of rebuilding was astronomical. The engineering challenge is immense, and the future of Willow Creek hung by a precarious thread. The dam, in particular, was a ticking time bomb. Experts warned that another heavy rainfall could trigger a catastrophic collapse, wiping the town off the map. "We need a miracle. Robert," Reverend Davies had said to him just yesterday, his voice hushed with despair. "This town is dying, and it's not a slow fade anymore. It's a gushing wound." The mayor paced his office, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight, looking out at the desolation. He had brought in several highly regarded architectural and engineering firms from Boston and New York, hoping their expertise would provide a lifeline. They had arrived with their glossy brochures, their slick presentations, and their exorbitant fees. They proposed sterile, cookie-cutter solutions, prefabricated housing, a soulless concrete replacement for the historic bridge, and a purely utilitarian, reinforced concrete dam that would forever scar the natural beauty of the valley. Their designs were practical, yes, but they completely ignored the unique charm and history of Willow Creek. They offered efficiency, not soul. The townspeople, already reeling from the disaster, vehemently rejected these soulless proposals. They wanted their town back, not a generic suburb. The mayor, despite his own pragmatism, understood their emotional attachment to Willow Creek's character. He dismissed the firms, leaving him with no viable solutions, and the dam's structural integrity worsening by the day. Kenneth Miller, Roy's father and a powerful local businessman, saw the crisis as an opportunity for profit. He owned a significant portion of the town's remaining undeveloped land and had quickly assembled a coalition of less scrupulous developers from out of state. Their plan was audacious and ruthless: declare the historic downtown a disaster zone beyond repair, condemn the damaged properties, purchase the land for pennies on the dollar, and then rebuild with cheap, mass-produced housing, turning Willow Creek into a faceless, profitable dormitory community. He had already begun lobbying the town council, pushing for a quick vote, exploiting the fear and desperation of the residents. He saw the mayor's indecision as weakness, an opening to seize control and dictate Willow Creek's future, ensuring his family's enduring financial dominance. Roy, already mirroring his father's calculating nature, walked with a new swagger, a predatory gleam in his eye, confident that his family would soon own Willow Creek. "We need someone with vision. Robert," Mrs. Eleanor Finch said to Mayor Thorpe one bleak Tuesday morning. She stood in his makeshift office, a small, dignified figure amidst the chaos, her voice calm but insistent. Her own cottage had been spared the worst of the flooding, but her heart ached for her town. Someone who can see beyond the rubble, who understands what makes Willow Creek. Willow Creek, Mayor Thorpe sighed, rubbing his temples. And who would that be? Eleanor. We've tried the best. They see only numbers, not the soul of our town. He respected Mrs. Eleanor, but he was weary of well-meaning but impractical suggestions. Ezra Thorne, she stated simply, her gaze unwavering. Ezra Thorne. He always saw the potential in our old buildings. He always loved this town, truly loved it. And he's built remarkable things. Robert. Things of beauty and substance. The mayor stiffened. Ezra Thorne, the dreamer. The boy he had dismissed, whose fanciful drawings he had scoffed at. The thought was absurd, almost laughable. He was a world-famous architect. Yes, he'd heard the rumors, seen an article or two in national magazines. But Willow Creek, why would he ever come back, and what could a dreamer do in the face of such practical, concrete problems? Eleanor, with all due respect, the boy, a man now, I suppose he's built skyscrapers in Los Angeles, museums in Chicago. This is a small town, a disaster zone. We need pragmatic engineering, not artistic flourishes. His tone was dismissive, reflecting his deep-seated skepticism about anything outside his conventional worldview. But Mrs. Eleanor persevered. She reminded him of Ezra's quiet kindness, his meticulous work on her porch, his innate understanding of structure and design, even as a child. She spoke of the prophecy she had given him years ago, how Willow Creek would eventually need him. She brought up the failing dam, the unique challenge it presented, arguing that only someone with an unconventional creative approach could find a truly sustainable solution that preserved the town's character. She painted a picture of Ezra's unique talent, not as an indulgence, but as the very tool they needed. "He won't just rebuild the physical structures, Robert," she insisted. "He'll rebuild the spirit of Willow Creek. He knows its soul." Her persistence, coupled with the escalating pressure from Kenneth Miller's development plans and the undeniable urgency of the dam crisis, slowly wore down the mayor's resistance. He was desperate. He had no other options. The thought of Kenneth Miller carving up Willow Creek for cheap profit was more abhorrent than trusting a dreamer. He swallowed his pride, a bitter pill. "All right, Eleanor," he finally conceded, his voice heavy with resignation. "All right, if you truly believe he can help, send him an invitation, a formal one. Tell him we're in dire straits, but don't make any promises." His agreement was not born of belief, but of a pragmatic desperation, a last resort before complete capitulation. He still harbored deep doubts, seeing Ezra as a long shot at best, a sentimental folly at worst. Miles away, in his sleek, minimalist office overlooking the sprawling tapestry of Los Angeles, Ezra Thorne was immersed in the final tweaks of a massive eco-friendly urban park project. His firm's reputation was at its zenith. Commissions flowed in from every corner of the globe. His days were filled with meetings with city planners, engineers, and investors. His nights often spent poring over complex digital renderings. Yet, a subtle disquiet had been stirring within him. He felt a sense of immense accomplishment, but also a growing disconnect, a feeling that something fundamental was missing. The grand scale of his projects, while impressive, lacked the intimate connection he had once felt to the humble buildings of Willow Creek. Then came the email. It was formal, almost stiff, from the office of the mayor, Willow Creek, Massachusetts. Ezra clicked it open, a knot forming in his stomach. The subject line read, "Urgent Rebuilding Project, Willow Creek Disaster Relief." The email outlined the devastating flood, the precarious state of the dam, the failed attempts of other firms, and the desperate need for a unique, visionary solution. It was a plea, disguised in official jargon, signed by Mayor Robert Thorpe. There was also a short, personal addendum, handwritten and scanned, from Mrs. Eleanor, "Ezra, dear boy, it's time. Willow Creek truly needs you now. I knew you would return." Ezra read the email twice, then a third time. The dry, bureaucratic language contrasted sharply with Mrs. B. Eleanor's heartfelt plea, igniting a complex cocktail of emotions within him. Willow Creek, the place of his childhood, of the whispers, of Roy Miller's cruel taunts, the place he had left with a burning vow to prove them all wrong. He had done that, undeniably. He was world famous, successful beyond his wildest childhood dreams. He had built monuments. He had designed the future. But Willow Creek, the memory of the crumbling town hall, the desolate mill, the very essence of its fading character, rose vividly in his mind. He remembered the feeling of helplessness as Roy crumpled his blueprint. He remembered Mrs. Eleanor's gentle prophecy. Now, his hometown, the very place that had cast him out, was calling for him, desperate and broken. The world had come to him. But now his origin, his past, was demanding his attention. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, gazing out at the vast, glittering expanse of Los Angeles. He had built wonders here, but they were not his wonders in the same way Willow Creek's broken facades had once been. He felt the pull of responsibility, a profound desire to return to the root of his dreams, to apply his hard-won skills to the very place that had sparked his initial vision. Yet, the old wounds lingered. The memory of the scorn, the dismissals, the pain of being labeled a dreamer in a town that had no room for dreams. Could he truly go back? Could he face the ghosts of his past? The people who had actively worked to diminish him? He thought of Mrs. Eleanor's unwavering faith, of his father's quiet pride. He thought of the crumbling dam, a disaster waiting to happen. The decision gnawed at him, a conflict between his professional obligations and a deep, personal yearning for redemption, for completion. He had built for the world. Now, could he build for home? The pull grew stronger, an undeniable gravitational force. Willow Creek was not just a town in crisis. It was the final, defining canvas for the dreamer who had dared to leave, and now had to decide if he dared to return. The stage was set for his return, a full-circle journey back to the very place where his dreams had been born and nearly extinguished. The familiar sign for Willow Creek, a weather-beaten wooden carving of a weeping willow, appeared abruptly through the windshield of Ezra Thorne's sleek, electric sedan. It was the same sign he'd seen 1,000 times, the same creak of metal on a windy day, yet it felt utterly foreign now. The old Ford pickup he'd left in was a distant memory, replaced by a vehicle that hummed with quiet power, a testament to the decades of relentless work and soaring success that lay between that departure and this return. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, so distinct to Willow Creek, filled his nostrils, pulling him back into a past he had meticulously built himself away from. Willow Creek had indeed changed, though not in the way Ezra had once dreamed. The storm's devastation was immediately apparent. Instead of the gentle decay he remembered, there was now raw ruin. Homes along the riverfront were boarded up, their windows shattered, their foundations crumbling. Piles of debris, splintered wood, twisted metal, and soggy belongings lined the streets like morbid sculptures. The historic stone bridge, once a picturesque landmark, was now a mangled skeleton of concrete and rebar, a temporary metal span jerry-rigged beside it. The very air felt heavy, not just with dampness, but with a palpable sense of defeat and despair. The town's once sleepy despair had escalated into outright crisis. Ezra drove slowly through the familiar streets, each turn a jolt of recognition, each dilapidated building a punch to the gut. The old general store, where he'd bought countless penny candies, had a gaping hole in its roof. The town hall's grand porch, the one he'd sketched so many times, was now completely gone, leaving an ugly, raw wound on its facade. He passed by the remains of the old mill, his former canvas of dreams. It looked even more forlorn now, its skeletal frame more exposed, a testament to the storm's fury and years of neglect. This wasn't just a town in disrepair, it was a town in mourning. And within that mourning, he knew, festered the familiar old resentments. His first official meeting was at the temporary town hall, set up in the old community center, as the original building was still under repair. Mayor Robert Thorpe, looking considerably older and more haggard than Ezra remembered, rose to greet him. The mayor's handclasp was surprisingly firm, but his eyes still held that familiar flicker of skepticism, mixed with a desperate hope he tried, and failed, to conceal. His suit, usually immaculate, was wrinkled, and his hair seemed even thinner. The man who had once dismissed Ezra as a fanciful dreamer was now clearly operating from a position of profound weakness. "Mr. Thorne," Mayor Thorpe began, his voice stiff, betraying his unease. "Welcome back to Willow Creek. I appreciate you responding to our urgent request." He still couldn't quite bring himself to call Ezra by his first name, maintaining a formal distance. "Things are dire, as you can see." He gestured vaguely towards the window, revealing a patch of muddied ground and more debris. "We've had several firms come through, big names, but their solutions, they just don't fit Willow Creek. Too expensive, too generic. We need something different." His admission was grudging, a veiled acknowledgement of his own failures. Ezra nodded. understanding the unspoken apology. I understand. Mayor Thorpe, I've seen the damage. It's extensive. But Willow Creek has a unique spirit. It needs a solution that respects its past while building for its future. He spoke calmly, professionally, allowing his reputation to speak for itself. But his words carried a subtle challenge, an unspoken question of whether the mayor and the town were truly ready to embrace a vision beyond their comfort zone. Just as Ezra began to outline his initial thoughts, the double doors to the community center burst open with a theatrical flourish. Standing there, framed by the late afternoon sun, was Roy Miller. He hadn't changed much in appearance, still broad-shouldered, still with that arrogant tilt to his chin, but his expensive suit and a glinting watch spoke volumes of his accumulated wealth and influence. His eyes, though, were what truly captured Ezra's attention. They held the same predatory gleam he remembered, now sharpened by years of ruthless business dealings. He was no longer just the town bully. He was the town's most powerful businessman, a formidable adversary. Roy strode into the room, his presence immediately dominating the space. He ignored Mayor Thorpe, his gaze fixed solely on Ezra, a sneer twisting his lips. Well, Roy drawled, his voice thick with sarcasm. If it isn't Ezra Thorne, the prodigal dreamer returns. Heard you made a name for yourself building glass boxes in the big city. Thought you'd forgotten all about humble little Willow Creek. His voice was loud, deliberately condescending, designed to cut Ezra down to size in front of the mayor and the handful of town council members present. His intent was clear: to immediately re-establish the old hierarchy, to remind Ezra of his past humiliation, and to publicly undermine his authority. Roy's power in Willow Creek was substantial. He owned Miller's Hardware, which had become the primary supplier for all local construction, and he had significant investments in local real estate. He saw Ezra's return not as a salvation for the town, but as a direct threat to his own carefully laid plans for profitable disaster recovery. Mr. Miller, Mayor Thorpe interjected, trying to inject some authority into his voice. We're in a private discussion with Mr. Thorne about the town's recovery, Roy scoffed. Recovery don't make me laugh. Thorpe, this town needs a strong hand, not some fantasist with blueprints for floating gardens. We've been over this. The Miller Group has a proposal. Practical, efficient, and ready to go. No dreams involved. He winked conspiratorially at a council member, who shifted uncomfortably. His subtle implication was that Ezra's ideas were financially unsound and aesthetically unsuited for the traditional town, subtly linking Ezra's past dreamer label to present-day financial recklessness. He had already started a whisper campaign, portraying Ezra as an outsider who would impose his radical city ideas on their quaint town, destroying its character for his own glory. Ezra met Roy's gaze, his face a mask of calm composure. The boy who had once shrunk under Roy's taunts was long gone. Mr. Miller, Ezra replied, his voice even, devoid of emotion. My work speaks for itself, and Willow Creek is my home. I believe it deserves more than just practical solutions. It deserves a future that honors its past. His words were a direct challenge, not just to Roy's plans, but to his entire philosophy. He was refusing to be diminished, reclaiming his narrative. Roy laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. Honors its past, you ran from its past. Thorne ran straight to the bright lights. And now you come back, expecting us to believe you care. Spare me the theatrics. The only thing you're good at is drawing pretty pictures. This isn't art class. Thorne, this is real life. This is about contracts and construction. And let me tell you, your dreams won't hold up this dam, or put roofs over people's heads. He gestured dismissively at Ezra's briefcase, implying it contained nothing but fanciful sketches. Roy's contempt was a thick, almost physical presence in the room, designed to stifle any budding hope. He sought to portray Ezra as an incompetent, overly idealistic artist incapable of handling the pragmatic realities of a disaster zone. Mayor Thorpe shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between the powerful Roy Miller and the celebrated, yet still unproven to him, Ezra Thorne. He still harbored the old doubts about Ezra, but the gravity of the situation, and Mrs. Eleanor's insistence, had forced his hand. He needed a miracle, and he grudgingly acknowledged that Ezra might be the only one capable of delivering it. He spoke up, his voice tinged with the familiar conservatism that had defined his entire tenure as mayor. Mr. Thorne has agreed to present his initial assessment and conceptual plans to the town council and the community this Friday evening. At the old library, we simply ask for a plan that is both feasible and respects the town's historical character. Nothing too outlandish. The mayor's words, while seemingly offering Ezra a platform, were also a subtle challenge, an implicit warning not to stray too far from Willow Creek's established sensibilities. He was setting Ezra up for a public unveiling, forcing him to present his talent under extreme pressure and in a skeptical environment. Ezra nodded, acknowledging the mayor's unspoken caveats. I understand, Mayor, and I assure you, my plans will honor Willow Creek's character. They will be both visionary and practical. He knew this was his moment, his opportunity to not just present blueprints, but to confront the very perception of himself that had been cemented in this town for decades. He needed to show them that a dreamer could also be a builder. That vision could be the most pragmatic tool of all. As the meeting concluded, Roy Miller sidled up to Ezra, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Don't think you can waltz back in here and change things. Thorne, he snarled, his eyes cold and hard. This town is mine now. My family built it, and my family will rebuild it. And if you think you can stand in my way with your fancy designs, you've got another thing coming. I'll make sure you leave Willow Creek just like you did before, with your tail between your legs, and nothing but empty dreams. His threat was clear, backed by the implicit power of his wealth and connections. Ezra met his gaze, unflinching. We'll see, Roy, he simply said, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel that surprised even himself. We'll see. Ezra spent the next 2 days immersed in Willow Creek, walking its streets, studying its damaged buildings, observing the resilience of its people. He revisited the old mill, spent hours at the compromised dam, analyzing its original construction, its points of weakness. He talked to engineers, historians, and residents, absorbing every detail, every nuance of the town's essence. He wasn't just planning structures, he was studying a community, understanding its heart. He worked tirelessly in his temporary office, transforming his notes and observations into intricate designs, blending his global experience with his intimate understanding of Willow Creek. On Friday evening, the old library, still showing signs of water damage but hastily prepared, was packed. The air crackled with anticipation and a heavy dose of skepticism. Every notable citizen of Willow Creek was there. The town council, local business owners, and a significant portion of the general public. Mayor Thorpe sat at the head of the long, makeshift table, his face unreadable. Roy Miller occupied a prominent seat in the front row, a smug, challenging smirk plastered across his face, his arms crossed, ready to pounce on any perceived weakness. He had brought a small contingent of his own allies, their faces mirroring his disdain. Ezra stood before them, a world-renowned architect, yet for a fleeting moment he felt like that skinny, awkward boy again, holding a crumpled drawing. He saw the faces that had dismissed him, the eyes that had laughed at his dreams. But then he saw Mrs. Eleanor, sitting quietly in the third row, her gaze warm and encouraging, a silent beacon of hope. She was his selective witness, the one person who truly believed in him, the person who had summoned him back. Her presence grounded him, reminding him of his purpose. "Good evening, everyone," Ezra began, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs. "My name is Ezra Thorne." He paused, letting the name hang in the air, a name that evoked both distant fame and familiar, local contempt. He knew this was his initial unveiling to the town, not just of his plans, but of the transformed man he had become. He wasn't going to hide his past, he was going to embrace it, and in doing so, redefine it. He was ready to present not just blueprints, but a vision that would challenge Willow Creek to finally dream again. The town held its breath, poised between its past and a future it couldn't yet comprehend. The air in the old Willow Creek library was thick with a mixture of dampness from the recent flood, the musty scent of ancient books, and an almost palpable tension. Every seat was taken, and people stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, straining to see. Mayor Robert Thorpe sat rigidly at the head of the long table, his face a carefully neutral mask that barely concealed his underlying anxiety. Beside him, council members whispered amongst themselves, their glances darting nervously between Ezra and the formidable figure of Roy Miller. Roy, seated prominently in the front row, exuded an aura of smug anticipation. He was flanked by his father, Kenneth Miller, a man whose silver hair and sharp suit belied a predatory gaze, and several of their business associates. Roy's arms were still crossed, his lips curled in a subtle sneer, clearly expecting Ezra's presentation to be a spectacular failure, a confirmation of his long-held belief that dreamers were useless. He had already set the stage with his whispering campaign, portraying Ezra as an out-of-touch architect who would propose outlandish, financially ruinous projects, destroying the town's historical integrity for personal glory. Ezra stood before them, a world-renowned architect, yet for a fleeting moment, the ghosts of his past flickered. He saw the faces that had dismissed him, the eyes that had laughed at his dreams. But then his gaze found Mrs. Eleanor, sitting quietly in the third row, her gentle smile a beacon of unwavering faith. Her presence was a grounding force, reminding him of his purpose. He drew a deep breath, the scent of old paper and damp wood filling his lungs, and the familiar comfort of it helped steady his nerves. This wasn't just a presentation. It was his defining moment, his arena, where he had to prove that the boy they had scorned was now the only one who could truly save them. The weight of years of ridicule, neglect, and the town's desperate need pressed down on him, amplifying the stakes. "Good evening, everyone," Ezra began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the murmurs. He didn't start with complex technical jargon or flashy digital renderings. Instead, he began with a story, a narrative as old as Willow Creek itself. "Many years ago, I walked these streets as a boy, a dreamer, as some called me." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting Roy Miller's, who merely scoffed softly. "I saw not just buildings, but stories. Stories of resilience, of community, of craftsmanship. Willow Creek is more than just bricks and mortar. It is a tapestry woven from generations of lives, traditions, and memories." His words resonated with the townsfolk, stirring a forgotten sense of pride. He was speaking their language, acknowledging their history, not dismissing it. He then transitioned to the present, acknowledging the devastation with frank honesty. "The recent flood has tested that resilience. It has damaged our homes, our businesses, and threatened our very existence. The solutions proposed thus far, while perhaps practical in a purely logistical sense, have failed to capture the essence of what makes Willow Creek unique. They would erase our history, replace our soul with something generic and lifeless." A murmur of agreement swept through the audience. They had felt the same unease about the previous proposals. Roy Miller's face remained impassive, but his jaw subtly tightened. Now, Ezra moved to the large interactive screen he had set up. The lights dimmed slightly. "My vision for Willow Creek," he continued, "is not merely to rebuild, but to reimagine, to respect our past, revitalize our present, and prepare for a sustainable, prosperous future." The first image flashed onto the screen, a breathtaking, panoramic rendering of the Willow Creek he envisioned. It wasn't a radical departure, but a masterful blend of old and new. The historical buildings were meticulously restored, not just repaired, but enhanced with subtle, modern integrations, solar panels disguised as roof tiles, geothermal heating systems discreetly tucked beneath foundations. The crumbling mill, once a symbol of industrial decline, was transformed into a vibrant mixed-use complex, a public market on the ground floor, affordable artist studios on the upper levels, and a soaring, light-filled glass atrium that truly captured the essence of his childhood dreams, extending gracefully towards the river. He then unveiled his innovative solution for the critical issue, the dam. Instead of a purely utilitarian concrete wall, Ezra proposed a multi-tiered cascading water feature that would seamlessly integrate with the natural landscape. It wasn't just a flood control mechanism, it was a beautiful public park with terraced gardens, walking paths, and viewing platforms. Beneath its aesthetic appeal lay cutting-edge engineering, a series of intelligent sluice gates, subterranean reservoirs, and bioengineered natural filtration systems that would manage water flow with unprecedented efficiency, while also generating clean energy for the town. "This is not just a dam," Ezra explained, his voice gaining passion. "It is a sustainable ecosystem, a recreational hub, and a symbol of Willow Creek's rebirth, turning our greatest threat into our greatest asset." This was the true symbolic arena, the heart of the town's crisis, where his dream offered a truly transformative solution. As Ezra spoke, he walked the audience through animated simulations of the revitalized town families strolling along the riverwalk, artists working in the mill studios, children playing in the dam park. He presented detailed schematics, showcasing his mastery of structural engineering, his profound understanding of sustainable design, and his respect for the town's architectural heritage. He outlined a phased construction plan that would create local jobs, use local materials where possible, and minimize disruption to residents. His presentation was thorough, brilliant, and, most importantly, deeply empathetic. He hadn't just designed buildings, he had designed a future that felt both grand and intimately familiar. During a brief pause for questions, Roy Miller shot to his feet, his face contorted in a sneer. "This is all just a pretty picture show. Thorne," he boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Where are the real numbers? The cost projections? This looks like a pipe dream that will bankrupt this town. And what about my father's plan? It's practical, it's cost-effective, and it's ready to go now." He gestured wildly, trying to regain control of the narrative, to dismiss Ezra's vision as mere fantasy. "This isn't some architectural competition. This is our livelihood. How much is this ecosystem going to cost us?" "Thorne, billions more." He scoffed, looking at the town council. "This is just a scheme to line your own pockets. Bring in your fancy big city contractors, and turn Willow Creek into some kind of museum piece no one can afford." He deliberately omitted his own financially driven, destructive plan, choosing instead to attack Ezra's financial viability and motives. The room stirred, a murmur of doubt rippling through the crowd. Roy's words, tapping into the ever-present fear of financial ruin and the resentment of outsiders, hit a nerve. This was the critical Nin Tho moment, the precipice where Ezra's vision could collapse under the weight of suspicion and practical concerns. The mayor shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on Ezra, hoping for a definitive answer. Ezra remained calm, unperturbed by Roy's outburst. He had anticipated this. He clicked a button on his remote, and the screen shifted from beautiful renderings to a series of meticulously detailed financial projections. "Thank you, Mr. Miller, for bringing up an excellent point," Ezra said, his voice even. "Costs are indeed paramount, and this is precisely where innovation becomes the most practical solution." He then revealed a series of partnerships he had quietly forged with leading environmental engineering firms and sustainable energy consortiums. He showed how the proposed dam, generating clean hydroelectric power, would not only offset its own construction costs over time, but would also provide a steady revenue stream for the town. He presented figures on projected tourism growth from the revitalized downtown and dam park, and detailed grants he had already pre-qualified Willow Creek for. grants specifically designed for sustainable community development and historical preservation. The upfront investment, Ezra explained, pointing to clear, easy-to-understand charts, is offset by long-term savings, new revenue streams, and external funding sources that are only available for projects of this scale and vision. This plan, he concluded, his voice rising with conviction, is not merely an architectural blueprint. It is an economic revitalization strategy designed to make Willow Creek not just survive, but thrive. His meticulous financial breakdown, presented with unassailable clarity, effectively neutralized Roy's accusations of financial irresponsibility. The murmurs in the room shifted from doubt to impressed whispers. Mayor Thorpe, his eyes widening with genuine surprise, leaned forward, studying the figures. But Ezra wasn't finished. He knew Roy's attack wasn't just about money, it was about control, about dismissing his very identity. He clicked one last time, and a final image filled the screen, a simple, almost crude drawing of the old town hall, its porch, crumbling, exactly as he had sketched it as a boy. Then, beside it, the pristine, fully restored image of the town hall in his new vision. Many years ago, Ezra said, his voice softer, more personal, I sat outside this very building, sketching its broken porch. I saw its potential. Even then, some called me a dreamer. His gaze swept over the crowd, landing briefly on Roy, then settling on Mrs. Eleanor, whose eyes brimmed with tears. And yes, I am a dreamer, but a dreamer, when given the tools and the opportunity, can also be a builder who doesn't just put up walls, but builds connections, who doesn't just lay foundations, but lays the groundwork for a community's soul. He then looked directly at Roy Miller, his gaze firm and unyielding. Mr. Miller, you said this was about contracts and construction, and you are right, but it's also about integrity, about vision, and about choosing whether to exploit a town in crisis for profit, or to truly invest in its future, its spirit. His words, delivered with quiet power, were a direct, public indictment of Roy's hidden agenda, a revelation of his cynical approach to Willow Creek's future. The implication was clear. Roy's plan was about destruction disguised as development, while Ezra's was about true, empathetic growth. A collective gasp swept through the room. Roy's face, which had been frozen in a sneer, visibly paled. He sputtered, trying to interrupt, but the sheer force of Ezra's conviction, coupled with the unassailable evidence of his professionalism and passion, had already turned the tide. The audience, initially skeptical, was now completely captivated, their faces shifting from apprehension to wonder, then to awe. They saw not just an architect, but a protector, a visionary who truly understood their town. The mayor, his eyes wide with a newfound understanding, slowly rose to his feet. He looked from the grand vision on the screen to the composed figure of Ezra, and then, for a brief, uncomfortable moment, at the stunned, speechless Roy Miller. Then, in a moment that would forever be etched in the history of Willow Creek, Mayor Thorpe did something no one expected. He began to clap, a single, hesitant clap at first, then another and another, until the entire room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. People cheered. Tears streamed down Mrs. Eleanor's face, and even some of Roy Miller's own allies looked distinctly uncomfortable, their faces flushed. The applause was not just for the brilliance of the architectural plan. It was a roaring vindication for Ezra Thorne, the dreamer who had returned to show them all what true vision could build. It was a societal acknowledgement of his triumph, a powerful reversal of years of scorn. Roy Miller, defeated and exposed, stood frozen amidst the celebratory roar, his smug confidence shattered, his face a mask of furious, impotent rage. The boy they had teased had not only returned, he had conquered their doubt, their prejudice, and their despair. The climax was complete. The tables had turned, and Willow Creek had found its unlikely savior. The thunderous applause that had filled the old Willow Creek library slowly receded. replaced by a lingering hum of excitement and disbelief. People gathered in small knots, dissecting Ezra's presentation, their faces alight with a hope they hadn't dared to feel in months. The vision he had painted was so clear, so compelling, that it had irrevocably shifted the town's collective consciousness. The dreamer had delivered not just a dream, but a meticulously calculated, financially sound, and deeply resonant path forward. Roy Miller, however, remained a stark anomaly in the celebratory atmosphere. He stood frozen, his face a mask of furious, impotent rage. The cheers for Ezra were like a physical assault, each clap a hammer blow to his carefully constructed edifice of power and influence. His father, Kenneth Miller, usually the picture of unflappable shrewdness, looked equally stunned, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. The public outcry against their development plans, which had been steadily building, now intensified into an undeniable roar. People who had once been swayed by their promises of quick solutions now saw their true, self-serving intentions, illuminated by the stark contrast of Ezra's genuine vision. Over the next few days, the full weight of the public's sentiment, combined with Ezra's unassailable presentation, crashed down upon the Millers. Local newspapers, emboldened by the community's shift, began publishing scathing editorials questioning the ethics of the Miller Group's disaster recovery proposals. Investigative journalists, previously intimidated by Kenneth Miller's influence, now dug into their past dealings, uncovering a pattern of predatory land acquisitions and shoddy construction practices in other struggling towns. One particularly damning article revealed a leaked email chain detailing Roy's attempts to bribe a council member to fast-track their development permits. The town council, reeling from the public backlash and faced with undeniable evidence of the Millers' unscrupulous tactics, launched an immediate investigation. Within a week, Kenneth Miller's permits were revoked, his property acquisition contracts frozen, and the Miller Group found itself facing a barrage of lawsuits from angry residents and a formal inquiry by the state attorney general's office. Roy Miller, his smug confidence shattered, watched helplessly as his family's empire, built on decades of ruthless dealings, began to crumble. He was no longer the intimidating bully. He was a pariah, shunned by the very community he had sought to control. The weight of public opinion, combined with legal repercussions, ensured his downfall was swift and humiliating. He lost everything: his influence, his reputation, and eventually, his freedom, as charges of fraud and attempted bribery led to his arrest and subsequent conviction. The once dominant figure was reduced to a cautionary tale. While Roy's world imploded, Mayor Robert Thorpe experienced his own profound transformation. In the days following Ezra's presentation, the rigid conservatism that had defined his tenure began to crack, replaced by a sense of genuine humility and an almost childlike wonder. He spent hours poring over Ezra's blueprints, asking detailed questions about the sustainable energy systems, the ecological integration of the dam, and the historical preservation aspects. He saw not just the brilliance of the architecture, but the depth of Ezra's commitment to Willow Creek, a commitment he himself, in his own practical way, had failed to grasp. One afternoon, Mayor Thorpe invited Ezra to his now fully restored office in the town hall. The room, once dusty and melancholic, felt lighter, as if a window had finally been opened to the future. The mayor offered Ezra a cup of lukewarm coffee, his hands trembling slightly. "Ezra," he began, his voice raspy, I owe you an apology, a profound one. For years, I dismissed you. I saw your dreams as impractical, even foolish. I held on to the past so tightly. I couldn't see the future you were trying to show us. I was blind, and I was wrong. His confession was heartfelt, delivered with a sincerity that surprised Ezra. It was a complete reversal for the man who had personified Willow Creek's stubborn resistance to change. "You didn't just give us a plan, Ezra," the mayor continued, looking at him with genuine respect. "You gave us back our hope. You reminded us of what Willow Creek truly is, and what it can become." He paused, clearing his throat. "I want to offer you something, more than just the contract for the rebuild. I want to offer you complete creative freedom. The town council has unanimously voted to give you the authority to oversee every aspect of the revitalization. And," he added, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes, "we want to establish a permanent Willow Creek Architectural Trust, with you at its head. It would be dedicated to ensuring that all future development in this town adheres to the principles of sustainable design, historical preservation, and community integration. This isn't just a project, Ezra. It's a legacy. Your legacy." Ezra felt a warmth spread through him, a profound sense of vindication that went far deeper than any architectural award he had ever received. This was more than just a job. It was the ultimate acknowledgement, the official sanction of his vision by the very town that had once rejected him. It meant he could truly build Willow Creek's new future, not just piece by piece, but as a cohesive, living entity, fulfilling his lifelong promise. This was the meaningful opportunity, allowing him to fully realize his deepest aspirations. In the ensuing weeks, Willow Creek buzzed with a newfound energy. Construction began almost immediately, starting with the critical repairs to the dam, now redesigned as Ezra's beautiful, functional water feature. Local contractors, many of whom had been struggling, were hired, injecting much-needed life back into the local economy. The old mill began its transformation, its broken windows replaced with gleaming glass, its interior stripped bare for the new market and artist studios. The sound of hammers and saws, once a mournful echo of the past, was now the vibrant symphony of progress. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Ezra found himself walking with Mrs. Eleanor Finch along the newly cleared riverfront. The temporary bridge had been replaced by Ezra's sleek, modern design, which subtly echoed the curves of the old stone bridge it replaced, a perfect fusion of past and future. The air was cool, carrying the fresh scent of sawdust and newly turned earth. It's more beautiful than I ever imagined. Ezra. Mrs. Eleanor said, her voice soft with emotion, gazing at the skeletal framework of the mill, already hinting at its future glory. You truly did it. You brought life back to our Willow Creek. Ezra smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. You always believed, Mrs. Eleanor, even when I was just a boy, sketching castles in the air. You saw something in me that no one else did. She gently squeezed his arm. I told you. Dear boy, Willow Creek needed your dreams. It just took a little time and a little push for them to see it, too. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the town. You've changed this place, Ezra, but you've changed, too. You're not just a dreamer anymore. You're a master builder, a true architect of hope. Ezra looked out at the town, at the skeletal beams rising against the twilight sky, at the familiar houses that would soon be restored to their former glory, and at the faces of the people, now filled with pride and optimism. The whispers were gone, replaced by the joyful sounds of construction, of children playing, of a community rebuilding. He had returned, not to merely prove a point, but to fulfill a promise. Willow Creek, once a prison of his past, was now the canvas for his greatest triumph, a living testament to the power of unwavering vision and the enduring legacy of a boy who dared to dream. 5 years had passed since the triumphant evening at the old Willow Creek Library, 5 years that had transformed the quiet, decaying town into a vibrant testament to vision and resilience. The scent of damp wood and forgotten dreams had been replaced by the fresh aroma of new timber, blooming flowers, and the invigorating salt tang of a thriving community. Willow Creek, once on the brink of collapse, was now a shining example of successful urban renewal, a harmonious blend of historical preservation and innovative, sustainable design. It had truly become the new future Ezra Thorne had promised. The Willow Creek Rebirth Project, under Ezra's unwavering leadership as the head of the permanent Willow Creek Architectural Trust, was a resounding success. The dam, once a precarious threat, was now the Willow Creek Cascades, a magnificent tiered park and hydroelectric power source that seamlessly integrated into the natural landscape. Families picnicked on its grassy slopes, children splashed in the clean, filtered water features, and its discreetly placed turbines hummed softly, providing clean energy that powered the revitalized downtown. It had transformed from a symbol of fear into a place of beauty and utility. The old textile mill, once a desolate ruin, had been reimagined as the Millhouse Collective, its soaring glass atrium, Ezra's childhood dream made real, bathed the interior in natural light, illuminating a bustling public market on the ground floor where local artisans sold their crafts and fresh produce. The upper floors housed affordable artist studios and small startup businesses, breathing new economic life into the town. The historical brickwork of the original structure had been meticulously preserved, a striking contrast to the modern glass and steel additions, creating a dynamic dialogue between past and present. Main Street, once lined with boarded-up storefronts, now thrived. The historic homes and shops had been lovingly restored, their facades gleaming with fresh paint and intricate details. Ezra had implemented strict zoning and design guidelines, ensuring that any new construction complemented the town's architectural heritage rather than clashing with it. The town square, where Roy Miller had once mocked Ezra, was now a lively hub of activity, with outdoor cafes, public art installations, and a small amphitheater for community events. Tourists, drawn by articles in national travel magazines highlighting Willow Creek's remarkable transformation, now strolled its cobblestone streets, cameras clicking, admiring the blend of historic charm and modern innovation. Mayor Robert Thorpe, no longer the rigid conservative, had become Ezra's most ardent champion. His initial skepticism had completely dissolved, replaced by an infectious pride in what Willow Creek had become. He often gave public tours, his voice swelling with emotion as he recounted the town's near-death experience and its miraculous rebirth under Ezra's guidance. He had successfully championed new legislation, inspired by Ezra's principles, that promoted sustainable development and community-focused urban planning across the state. His political career, once stagnant, had experienced a late-stage revival, proving that even old dogs could learn new tricks when faced with true vision. Mrs. Eleanor Finch, now well into her 80s, remained Ezra's quiet confidant and the soul of the revitalized Willow Creek. Her cottage, still meticulously kept, stood as a symbol of the enduring spirit that Ezra had tapped into. She often sat on her perfectly repaired porch, watching the new life unfold around her, a serene smile gracing her lips. She had lived to see her quiet prophecy fulfilled, her small act of belief echoing into a profound reality. Ezra Thorne, the boy once teased for being a dreamer, was now Willow Creek's most revered citizen, though he still preferred the quiet satisfaction of his work to public adulation. His firm, Thorne and Associates, now had its East Coast branch located in a beautifully restored historical building in Willow Creek, serving as a living blueprint of his design philosophy. He still took on large, international projects, but his heart remained inextricably linked to Willow Creek. Beyond the physical transformation, Ezra recognized that his true legacy lay in inspiring others. He firmly believed that dreams, no matter how outlandish they seemed, held the power to shape reality. To that end, he established the Willow Creek Dreamers Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to nurturing young talent from underserved communities. The foundation provided scholarships for aspiring architects and artists, offered mentorship programs, and funded small-scale community projects that allowed young dreamers to turn their ideas into tangible realities. He frequently gave lectures at schools, not about the grand scale of his famous projects, but about the importance of persistence, the courage to be different, and the profound satisfaction of building something meaningful. He encouraged children, much like his younger self, to sketch their wildest ideas, to imagine impossible structures, and to believe in the power of their own unique visions. His own journey was a living testimony to the Foundation's core belief that potential often lies hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to see it, nurture it, and empower it. One warm spring afternoon, Ezra walked through the bustling Millhouse Collective. The air hummed with conversation, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the gentle clinking of pottery from an artisan's studio. He paused by a large, sunny window overlooking the rejuvenated Willow Creek River. A group of children, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, sat on a bench below, hunched over sketchbooks, their heads bent in intense concentration. They were drawing the cascading water features of the dam, the intricate brickwork of the mill, the soaring arch of the new bridge, all the elements that had once been mere lines in his own secret journal. Ezra smiled, a deep, genuine feeling of contentment settling over him. He wasn't just an architect who built structures. He was an architect who had built hope. He had transformed a physical space, yes, but more importantly, he had transformed a mindset, inspiring a new generation to see possibilities where only decay had once existed. Willow Creek, a beacon of what could be, now stood as his enduring legacy, a monument not just to his architectural genius, but to the transformative power of a boy who dared to dream, and then dared to build. He had come full circle, from the quiet, mocked dreamer to the world-renowned architect who had literally built his hometown's new future, ensuring that the whispers of despair were forever silenced by the vibrant hum of progress and possibility. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.